11th, 2025 Government Relations and Communications Committee meeting. If it seems like I'm rushing this evening, I am going to kind of try to keep things fast-paced. We have a couple people who have to drive very far to get home, and we want to be mindful of the weather and keep people safe. First item on the agenda is introductions and remarks. Dr. Kearney?
All right, thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Welcome back.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt you for 2 seconds? I did not mean to be rude. I want to point out one of our committee members is actually remote this evening. Ms. Lau is participating remotely, so sometimes you may hear a voice and not see a person, and that's why. Sorry to interrupt you. Thank you.
No problem. This is our first meeting since October, also our first meeting since board reorganization. We have no changes to the committee members, so I'm assuming all of you wanted to be here. And although we don't have
big assumption,
we don't have many items on tonight's agenda, I did meet with committee leadership and we felt it would be worthwhile to hold this meeting. So tonight we're going to have the opportunity to identify some recent government actions pertaining to education. I'm going to share some information about the upcoming legislative breakfast and hear any ideas that the committee members might have for potential topics of discussion at that breakfast. And as you had mentioned, with any luck, we'll be finished in time to get home before most of the snow.
Great. Next item on the agenda is public comment, and I do not see any in the room, so we're going to move on to the review of the minutes. Does anybody have any concerns with the minutes from last October? Okay, then they will stand as written. And the next item agenda is the legislative report summary. Dr. Kearney?
So thanks. All of you being veteran committee members are aware. At this committee, we do try to pay attention to federal and state actions that have a bearing on, or potential bearing on, Radnor Township School District. So since our last meeting, we've had a presidential election and the inauguration of President Trump, and with this has come some changes. Administration certainly has been taking a lot of executive action. One of the items that was highlighted in the DCIU legislative update is that, is the proposal to make significant changes, including potential elimination of the Department of Education. With all that's going on at the federal level, let alone what's going to be happening at the state level, we really need to kind of see what effect this, if any, will have on Radnor Township School District. So it is something we're going to continue to pay attention to. At the state level, which has a much greater direct bearing on Radnor Township School District, Governor Shapiro did give his budget address on February 4th. Previously at the Finance Committee, Mr. Pauling went over some of the highlights of that. He is proposing increased funding for public schools, but all of this really just marks the beginning of a very lengthy budget negotiations and adoption process. So things will change over the upcoming months, and we'll see where we land. He has proposed an additional $75 million for education funding. A few other highlights from his remarks were doubling the amount of money for student-teacher stipends, which was a topic that we've talked about in this committee last year, continuing free breakfast at school, and some cyber charter reform, capping the cyber tuition rate at $8,000 per student per year. So we'll see, what if any of that, what if any of that makes it through to the final budget and what it looks like as it goes through that process. Speaking of teacher shortages, you may have also seen in the DCIU legislative report that Representative Borowski is co-sponsoring legislation to support teachers who've got inactive certifications and need to continue their education in order to get those active by allowing them to earn 6 college credits at a reduced cost. So this does have some interest in Harrisburg. We'll have to see if it makes it through to an actual law. The State Board of Education has also taken some action on standards, approving proposed changes to standards that we had seen last year: career education work, economics, and personal finance, as well as formally moving the PSSA science from 4th grade to 5th grade, which is something we've spoken about in the curriculum committee, and this will be the first year where it's being tried in 5th grade, although it will not count towards reporting on student and teacher progress. So we're going to continue to monitor all of this federal and state activity as information becomes available, and we'll talk about it at this committee as appropriate. But if there's anything the committee members would like to add, by all means, you may.
I want to just highlight for people who didn't watch the finance meeting, and so that they don't have to go back and sit through an hour and a half of that to find the information. Typically, the federal funding that we get in Radnor is only about 1% of our budget. It is around $1 million, 1.3, I think was the number Mr. Pauling threw out. So it's not nothing, but in the scope of our budget, it's not, the sky isn't falling if that money becomes unavailable. The state contributes much more significantly to our budgets. So that's part of the reason we're much more focused on what's going on at a state legislative level. Does anybody have any questions about the agenda? It's interesting to me, there's not much prognostication in these legislative reports. It's just here's what's out there, and we don't necessarily know what's going to make progress. And this is a little bit outdated too. The report we have is from January. Hopefully next time we meet, we'll have a more updated report. I know that's not on you, Dr. Kearney. I know that's an issue with getting it from the DCIU, so we'll ask them to see how regularly we can get that. I know there's been some change over there.
I have a quick question about the timing on the Pennsylvania budget for the state budget. Do we know do we know when we expect to see that sort of?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going from memory. I think they're supposed to get it done by June 30th, but it does extend sometimes past then, depending on what's happening.
Yeah, it is. It's either June 1st or June 30th, and then, yes, they often take too long, and districts have some real concerns about paying bills, but more recently, they've been better about that. Okay, if that's it, let's move on to the legislative breakfast.
you're
Oh,
done.
sorry.
Sorry.
Yes, no, that's fine, Ms. Lau.
I just wanted to make the comment that the actions taken at the federal level can have ramifications on our district beyond the dollars that flow directly to us and that comprise our budget. For example, the announcement today that they are cutting close to $1 billion in research funding at the Department of Education. I mean, every single school district in our country relies on that research and data to actually know like fundamental things like whether the way we teach our students is actually effective. So, I just wanted to, make the point that it's kind of beyond the 1% of our budget that we get directly from the federal government.
It absolutely is. It's unfortunately probably not something that this committee can solve, is I think part of the challenge. We have a lot more sway with our local representatives and try to make sure that the state is still actively engaged in ensuring that we are properly educating students across the Commonwealth. But thank you. It's a point well taken. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Eliza.
So I recognize that this may be more of a policy question, but I'm kind of new, so getting familiar with it. That did remind me that President Trump has signed like other executive orders, such as like cutting DEI stuff, and also about allowing ICE raids in schools. And while we're not close to the border, we still have like a Hispanic population that may be targeted. So I was wondering like how we go about any of that stuff, if we plan to make those changes that the federal government has suggested, or like if we can just kind of put that aside, or just a question.
So we have been, as an administrative team, have been watching very closely the executive orders and have met with our legal counsel to discuss, all the different executive orders. So far, most of the executive orders are executive orders that are coming from the federal government, and the state government has a whole lot more to do with education and our policies and how we respond. So most of the things that we already have in place in district are going to remain in place. As those things that come that will force a potential change, we will then bring it here and, talk about it. As to even the example you gave, we already have in place procedures and process about when we would let local authorities into our district and when we won't let legal authorities into our district. People can't, whether it's ICE, whether it's police, can't come in demanding to meet with our kids or doing investigations unless they have a legitimate warrant. And, we would not allow that, the investigator, they'd have to. So our administrative team are all prepared for those things, but we are all watching it very closely.
Oh, that's a good question. Thank you. Okay, I don't want to rush anybody. Anybody else on this one? Okay, legislative breakfast update.
So one of the ways we do interact with local representatives is through our legislative breakfast, which we hold every year. This year, we are looking to have it on April 10th at Radnor Elementary School. And as we've done in past years, we'll work on the agenda in the exact times, but typically we have breakfast available starting around 7:45. The agenda items are dealt with between 8 and 10 o'clock, and then we have an optional tour of the school for anybody who might be interested, led by the principal, in this case, Dr. Young. So we've contacted the offices of our local representatives as well as Representative Scanlon. Representative Borowski and Senator Capoletti are going to be available to attend. Representative Scanlon was going to send an aide on that day to the legislative breakfast, and I think last year she actually sent two, so maybe they'll send more than one this year. I don't know. Just as a reminder, last year the topics we dealt with were funding for school construction and sustainability, and we appropriately were holding that at ITHN last year, and teacher shortages and talent recruitment, which is actually a topic we had addressed for the past 2 years. So I'm going to meet with the Radnor High School Student Council later this month to see what ideas or thoughts they might have about potential topics. But as we have done in the past, we also want to open up this committee if there's anything on your minds that you think we should be considering. And then we would come back most likely next month to kind of give an update on any of the details and some of the more specifics. So I will open up to the committee to see if there are any topics you think we should consider as we're developing the agenda and communicating with our representatives.
Any suggestions? Ms. Lau, I'm going to start with you so I don't forget to look up. Did you have any
Thank
suggestions?
you. Well, given what we were just talking about, I don't see how we can pick any topic other than the full-on assault on public education that is being perpetrated by our own federal government right now. And as you mentioned, our state lawmakers do have a little bit more power than we do as one district to try to mitigate the damaging effects of those policy actions. So I would love to use the legislative breakfast this year to really ask our state legislators what they intend to do to try to offset some of the damage that is currently being done at the federal level, what they can do to try to protect, the students of our Commonwealth from those decisions. And then I would like to ask our own board, to think about what we can do, not just in reaction to what the Trump administration is doing. I think we need to go beyond that. I think we need to think proactively rather than reactively and just be prepared, because I think just the pace of and the scope of what has already transpired, I don't think we can sit back and just wait for example, ICE agents to show up. Like, we need to be prepared and we need to know exactly what we're going to do to protect our students.
Okay. Any other suggestions?
No, I just want to second that conversation. I'm really pleased with Eliza's question. I think it's on the minds of a lot of people, and there's a lot of things happen quickly, so information is not easily or readily shared. All folks have different amounts of information or different thoughts, and I think it's incumbent upon us to have this conversation.
Go ahead.
I also wanted to, first of all, thank you, Eliza, for bringing that to our meeting and, your concerns, and which made me think about our legislative breakfast. Is it possible, Dr. Kearney, that we can actually have some students prepared to ask some questions of our representatives and help the representatives, be prepared for some of those questions as part of our legislative? I might like to see a little bit of that there, rather than more of a presentation, more of a kind of a Q&A. I think Eliza's question made me think that there are probably a lot of questions out there in the high school.
So,
And
you-
in the elementary
Yeah,
and the
no,
middle.
and these are all good ideas. I think the one thing I want to point out historically, and I think you would second this, historically, the legislative breakfast has been an opportunity for us to say, these are our issues, and share them with the legislators. It's less about asking them to come and answer it's not that they can't. I would say the Delaware County intermediate unit has there's a Delaware County legislative breakfast, which I think falls in May this year, and that one tends to be more the legislators come and they tell us what they're doing and we ask them questions. The Radnor one has historically been much more, we're telling them what we need from them, and it may be that we need certainty that they're looking to protect us if certain federal laws change, and that they're looking for ways to ensure. One of the things the federal government is saying is that they're going to push this back to the states to control. So it's possible what we're looking for is reassurance that the state is going to let us to continue to give a high-quality education to our students as we have for many, many years. So tell me, Dr. Kearney, I mean, do you disagree with my assessment? Like, that's what I've seen in my 7 years on the board, is that it's an explanation of what Radnor would like our advocates to advocate for.
Yeah, I think we've taken it as an opportunity to highlight some of the topics that are important to us and let the legislatures hear from stakeholders directly who they might not always hear from. So students are part of the legislative breakfast. We do have the student liaisons to different committees who are invited and participate. They're at the table with legislators, and they get to hear students' thoughts, like they get to hear administrators' thoughts, school board members' thoughts, teachers' thoughts who are also there. The format of the breakfast is ours to control to one degree or another. So I think this is a good input to hear that. And I think we give some thought to what, if any, opportunities there might be. As you said, we'd probably want to prepare our legislators because that's a different experience than they've had before. But that doesn't mean it's not one that we could consider.
I think if it's something we're going to consider, so the meeting's in April, and it's already February. So if we're going to change the style, like you said, it's something we just need to warn. That's not, I think, they typically have come prepared to listen. And that's why I think, for example, Representative Scanlon has sent her aides, because they come and they listen and they take notes and they go back and give her feedback. If what we're asking is that she sends people who are prepared to talk about her position on things, it may be a separate set of people she sends.
Yeah, it's possible.
I'm not saying we can't do it. I'm just saying it's a 180 shift from what we've done in the past.
And just thinking out loud, it could be a little bit of both. We could have some discussion, and we could have some opportunity for question and answer, perhaps. I am interested to hear what the students have to say later this month, and they may have some suggestions too. But it's important to hear yours as well.
So can I just ask for clarification? You mentioned meeting with the students later this month. So will you give kind of an explanation, because I don't think everybody necessarily remembers. How is it that you have historically prepared for these meetings? What's the student group do in terms of that?
Yeah, so this is, so I meet with the student government representatives at the high school, or at least I did last year, really just to kind of let them know that we have this and ask what are some topics of interest from them. Last year it was very interesting. They had a lot of fantastic topics, and part of what we were able to talk about towards the end is maybe the best place to approach each of those. So some of the topics they brought up were very much topics that could be handled at the building level or the district level, and then some, including sustainability, which we've wrapped into our school construction, was one that, certainly there would be a state role, and if not a federal role even, for something along those lines. So the conversation is during lunch and learn, and I go and listen to them, and then we talk a little bit at the end, or at least that's how we did it last year.
So it may be helpful, and Eliza, I'm assuming you'll be at that meeting as our representative.
Are you on student council? Liza may not be at that meeting.
Do you not invite all the representatives to the different school board committees to that?
Not to that meeting with the student. This is with our high school student council. These are-
Okay, it might be helpful if she could be invited, if she's got time.
I can let you know when it is if you're
Just
available.
as kind of two sets of ears at the meeting. I'm just thinking maybe we need to kind of plan that in March, we're going to have a more significant planning. And it doesn't have to be, we don't have to get into every detail here, but of how we're going to address and kind of divide if we're going to try and change the structure.
Yeah, I think we can definitely, let's see what materializes over the next couple of weeks. If our next meeting is March 18th, I think, and we're talking about April 10th, then we're probably
That's a
going to have
little
a pretty relatively firm agenda, I would imagine, by that
Okay.
point. I don't know. Not to say there's not some flexibility, but we do have to get invitations out. We want to make sure that people are aware of what we will be talking about. We do put together some briefing reports on the different topics. So,
Okay.
let's see how far we are between now and then.
Okay.
We don't want to steer too far afield if there's something really important to this committee, but at the same time, we will need to engage in some planning that probably can't wait until March 18th.
Okay.
But Eliza, I'll let you know when we're going to meet.
Other input, thoughts? Okay, I cut you off before. Did I covered your issue? Okay. Next item on the agenda is new business. Okay, and the final item is public comment, which I do not see anybody raising their hand in the room. You mentioned our next meeting is scheduled to be March 18th, and as Ms. Solomon so lovingly called it, in our garden suite in the administrative building. Garden. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye. Good night.